Good afternoon, and thank you for joining FAME's webinar, Impact of the CARES Act, Legal Issues Related to Temporary Distance Education, R2T4 Reporting, Audits, and more. I'm going to give it away to one of our presenters we all know and love, Ms. Sally Samuels. I'll have you take it away, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We have a great panel this afternoon, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing them because I think most of you know them already. We have Tom Knutte. Whoops, it went twice, sorry. We have Tom Knutte, Director of Government Strategies, and as you know, he's been on many of our webinars already, and he's integral part of FAME's consulting, not our consulting division, but he is a consultant for us. So he keeps us focused on what's going on in Washington, and we couldn't do any of these without his help. We also have Joe Knutte. He's an advisor at Stitich, CPA firm, and he's going to give us a little insight on the things we have to worry about as far as some of the accounting issues and how to handle this money. We have Ron Holt. He's an attorney, obviously, and he is, again, somebody you all are very familiar with. He works with us all the time. I think it's Russ Fitz. I never can pronounce the name of that company correctly, but we have all this information there that you'll be able to reach him later on if you need to get in touch with him. And at this point, Ron, I'm going to let you take it away.
Got a little introductory wrap for you. In a virus-weary world, we're here to brighten up your day. We'll try to answer questions, shed some light upon your way. You've had to close your doors and rush online to chat or Zoom, keeping students and your staff on board despite daily news of doom. So small wonder you've got worries, you've got struggles with the rules, but we're in this thing together and you'll come out as stronger schools. So let's put our minds together, talk through all your fears and cares. We'll work things out for students and triumph over all despair.
Thank you, Ron. That's very inspiring. I think we all are going to survive. It's just a matter of hanging in there, thinking through, doing what we have to do to make things work. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the stimulus package, at least certain parts of it. Any ed updates that we have, Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, which I know where there's lots and lots and lots of questions about. Some business office issues, Paycheck Protection Program, which if you haven't done anything about that, Joe and Ron are going to tell you why you should, and some other issues that we have out there. So we did get some additional stimulus questions and ed updates. Tom, what information do you have for us?
Take myself off mute. Sorry about that. Well, Sally, like everybody else, trying to wade through the guidance that was provided, and unfortunately the guidance that wasn't provided under the most recent information from the department. I can tell you in conversations with them that the significant areas like R2T4, the compliance issues related to audits and the timing for audits and many, many other issues included in CARES are not things that they are without focus on right now. In fact, the reason that we haven't seen much of that is because they're continuing to work on it to try and ensure that the information that they provide answers as many of the questions as possible that all of us have been encouraging schools to send through COVID-19 at ed.gov. They are making significant progress. I talked to Department of Ed officials literally earlier today. They do hope and recognize that there are a number of deadlines coming up, not the least of which is the cohort default rate deadline tomorrow for challenges. So we might yet even see something today or tomorrow on that particular issue. But the bottom line is what we have right now is what we have. But there is certainly much, much more to come from the department, including the key issues that everybody has talked about, the timelines for audits and program reviews, the issues related to leave of absences and R2T4 that we'll talk about, certainly more information on the institutional side of the stimulus funding under the emergency stabilization funds, and specifically the higher education emergency education funds. But for right now, the best they could say to me going into today's call was that they continue to be working very vigilantly and are having calls several times a day and are trying to do the best they can to get information passed back through the Office of Management and Budget and to the finish line to be posted.
Thank you, Tom. I know it's hard for them right now. They have so many things they're supposed to do. And I think you told me in addition to that, they're actually also the ones handling all the COVID-19 questions that are coming in.
That's correct. They have a small group of individuals. There's two different groups. One is working specifically on the grant assistance that we saw the first tranche of come through that we'll talk about here in a little bit for the students' perspective. The rest of those funds for the institutional side have yet to be outlined on what the requirements are going to be, but all of that is being done by the HEP group, which is the grants group within the Office of Policy Planning and Innovation. The other side, which is Anne Marie and a number of the individuals under Lynn Mahaffey, although she is transitioning over into the Office of the General Counsel, so there'll be a slot opening up there. But that's the side of the house that is focused on the issues related to R2T4, all of the clock hour and credit hour conversions and things like SAP, all of the verification V4, V5 issues. You've got John Colados and others working on issues related to 9010 and institutional eligibility under the financial and administrative capability requirements. A lot of healthy minds on a lot of issues, but those are basically the list of individuals along with Greg Martin working on the academic portions of this that are having to respond to all the questions that come in, both from major groups as well as through the COVID pipeline on the question and answer, as well as trying to develop and establish with council and others what the actual guidance will be going forward.
Great, Tom. Thank you for that. So I was all excited when I saw a fact sheet come out on 4.8, thinking that this was going to have some really good additional answers that we needed, and it didn't have much. So I've actually put the questions on this page, and it was most of it has to do with things other than what we're going to talk about today. So it has more to do with the money that's going to come to the institution for institutional use, not the money that was provided to the students. So what we're going to mostly focus on today is money provided to the students. These three additional questions were out there and they were answered. The answer to the first question is yes, and then there's a whole bunch of dialogue regarding it. And the answer to the second question was also yes, and again, more dialogue regarding that. And then the last one, it said you normally wouldn't have travel that you were purchasing in advance, and under some conditions it might be refundable, that type of thing. So just read through those questions and answers, and if it's of something that some of you are concerned about or want to know more information about. Yep, my mouse doesn't always want to cooperate here, sorry. Okay, so the higher education emergency funds. These are the student grant monies. Make sure I'm at the right place here, I'm sorry. Yes, okay. So this is the grant money you just received or you're applying for. Nobody's received it yet, although they claimed it could be ready as early as today, the 15th. I understand. We can't get into this and actually try to apply, but I understand that it's a pretty major inconvenience to try to go in there and figure out how to do the application, where to find your SAM's information. And I had schools calling me and saying, oh, the SAM's information that was in there is not the same DUNS information they actually are using because they purchased locations and forgot to change that DUNS number somewhere along the line. So there is a grant application process. which you've probably already read. Probably everybody's already tried it. And I bet most of you have already had to call for help to either grants.gov or the helplines that they have out there, because the instructions, even though they're 2 pages of how to fill the form out, that is a little vague. But on top of that, even getting in there to register is a big complication. So there are tips and guides out there, the application forms, how to download. You can download the certification and agreement, complete the application for federal assistance, and then the supplemental information form. Those actually are web apps, and those 2 last forms get uploaded back in. You can print them out, fill them out so that you know what you're going to upload later on. But it's a little more complicated than you might think, because none of us have ever had to apply for any government grants. Most of these, I mean, I'm sure the colleges, the state-funded schools, it was pretty much a piece of cake because they're used to applying for other types of government grants, but we've never had to do anything like this. But I hear schools are getting successful. They have everything submitted. The workspace looks a little complicated, but again, you have tutorials that you can play. You have diagrams that walk you through it. So don't lose hope. Go in there, apply for those funds. But think about it. Once you apply for the funds, I believe we have a few weeks still to apply. The next question is how should schools track the funds dispersed? Joe, you got any suggestions on this?
Sure. Yeah, there were a lot of challenges on people that were applying, but we're seeing a lot of people now are successful. Reach out. If anybody has a concern on that, you can reach out to Sikich or myself. In terms of how this fund should be tracked, I think we're advising, I think, Sally, you were on the same accord, that it probably makes sense to set up a separate bank account to when these funds go into the G5 and then get dispersed into that account. And then from that to track that in Excel or some kind of spreadsheet so that you have a audit trail that's specific only to the disbursement. So if someone were to ask later on, hey, how did you disperse these to your students? You didn't have to give them all your accounting records. You can just give them this one account and it'll make it a lot simpler.
So as far as that account's concerned, remember, guys, you are fiduciary of these funds. Every single penny must go to students. Do not play games with this money. I mean, this is student money. Be sure that you figure out a way of how you're going to disperse it. Some schools are waiting to send in that certification until they've figured out exactly how they're going to award this money to the students. So, Ron, suggestions on who they should award it to?
Well, you know, in calculating the amount to be delivered to each school, there's 75% that is attributable to the Pell population, 25% to non-Pell full-time equivalent students. So one way to do this is to break the money that you're receiving, that 50% portion, into 2 separate pools of money, and then to allocate those pools accordingly. So you have your 75% Pell fund and your 25% non-Pell fund. And then what you could do is, Joe and I talked about this, is initially, if you want to get some money out right away, is make a minor disbursement, depending on how much money you've received, maybe $100, $200 right away to everybody. The Secretary's letter on April the 9th suggested prioritizing students with the greatest need. Well, that'll take some time. Not just going back and looking at their applications and what their need was when they applied, but what their need is today, you know, depending on what job changes have occurred for the student and their household in light of everything that's going on with COVID. So you may not be able to gather that information right away. But within those universes, you know, the Pell universe, non-Pell universe, there's a number of ways you could proceed. In the case of non-Pell students, you could simply make a per capita allocation. If you've got 100 non-Pell students, just divide it evenly 100 ways. In the Pell universe, you could look at relative Pell position. For example, you could look at the awards that were made and compare an individual award to the total Pell universe, and then take that percentage and allocate the money that you have on that basis within the Pell universe. And as long as you have some rational method, and I think you capture that internally in a memo that you create so you can later explain it when there's a review, I think you won't have a problem. Again, the secretary's letter suggested that each school has discretion in how they allocate these funds as long as it's a reasonable method. There is emphasis that the secretary wants schools to place on prioritizing needs. So that's relative to how quickly can you do it. They don't want you holding this money very long, and you do have to give a report within 30 days. So I think balancing all those factors is important.
Tom.
A quick follow-up on that. Thank you, Ron. A quick follow-up. It's kind of a double-edged sword here, because they're calling this an emergency fund. So they want you to get the money out to the students for relief, which makes sense. However, they're also saying this money has to be dispersed out over a year. Well, a year to our students might as well be a lifetime, right? So I know people are devising like how they want to disperse these monies. I wouldn't commit to subsequent payments in a formal plan to your students right away, because then they think they're entitled to that money, whether they drop, whether they think they're going to get that money. So I think it's a two-tier approach here. Is one, I would suggest strongly to show that you're immediately concerned about your students' current situation, that you do an immediate disbursement of a very small portion of your money, maybe 10%. So, and I would do that across the board, because trying to determine, everybody's been affected. I mean, whether you have a zero EFC or whether you weren't getting any Pell money, maybe now in light of current circumstances, you would be eligible for more funding. So there'd be a professional override. Our suggestion is disperse the money right away and then create a plan to make sure that, as Ron said, it's based on 75% Pell recipients, so that those people are make sure they're covered. And I would do that out over time. That's my suggestion.
I'm going to add one and say, I don't think you want to spread it out over a year. The funds have to be spent within a year. We've got the immediate need now, and I think the sooner we can disperse it would be better. And I don't even see, they said every student is basically eligible. So I think that you should think about, if you're going to devise a plan, then you figure out pretty quickly what it is, and you put it in writing and you stick with it. You have to be sure you stick with it. Tom, I'm going to ask you a question. I don't know if you've had any conversation with them, with the department. What about non-Title IV programs? Is it a problem to disperse money to non-Title IV programs?
My understanding is this money is not for non-Title IV programs. You have pretty explicit information under section 18007, which is the definitions, and definition number 2 that talks about all of these funds as eligible through institutions that are Title IV eligible. I have had several questions and have posed the question to the department. I haven't gotten an official answer yet, but the unofficial answer was that these funds are for support of students that are Title IV eligible students at Title IV eligible institutions. That is, again, it hasn't been put in writing, and until you see it in writing, I wouldn't take it to the proverbial bank. But I think Congress was very clear in the eligibility criterion, and also in the directions that have come subsequent to that, that it always talks about individuals that are, and alludes to, including, as Ron talked about, the secretary putting a premium on individuals that were Pell eligible in the process. If I could, I would suggest that there's going to be a myriad of different ways schools are going to administer and deliver these funds. And I think that's okay. The guidance provides for a considerable amount of latitude. in the development and the construction of what you do. I believe, and this is one of the things that I think is very important, I think that it's probably as if not more important, and I know there's this rush to get the money out. I would tell everybody, and already have put in writing, that I think that it is more prudent to take a few days, and granted that may be as much as a week, and fully establish and fully think out what your policy and procedure is going to be, and then publish that. Because once you've published it, then you have the guidelines and the parameters for all to see and all to understand, and then disperse your funds that way. And there's going to be a number of different ways. I appreciate what Ron is saying about the 75-25 split. That certainly comports with the federal legislation on how the allocation was to come to the schools. I don't know that you necessarily have to carry that directly through to the student level, but it certainly is probably a safe way to do so. I do have other concerns as well, and I'll throw this back out to Joe and Sally, you as well as to Ron. One of the things that I've heard even on the NASFA call that I was on just before this one is that a number of schools are looking at the differences and distinctions of immediate need now versus what they may have had in terms of the calculation of even your EFC previously, because circumstances have changed. And I do believe that has to be taken into consideration. Would you all agree?
Right, the professional judgment Joe already mentioned, and yes, I agree, because you're going to have students and parents where students weren't eligible for Pell before, but now because of job loss and way less income, if they've managed to get through to unemployment even. In Florida, we've the system a few times. So therefore, you're going to have people out there that, you know, are desperate now that were in pretty good financial shape before.
There was considerable conversation on the NASFA call about within the for-profit community and the private nonprofit community within our collective community of holding some of those funds back in order to, whether it be giving an apportionment first and second, and there was some very considerable contrasting views there on whether or not that was the direction each individual institution was going to take. But there also was recognition that by holding the funds and giving them out in more than one disbursement, that in the event that an individual were to withdraw, that would leave more money for individuals that are currently continuing to maintain and work towards the completion of their program. So, you know, there is a pro and con to looking at individuals, and also whether or not you look at current enrollment versus and individuals enrolled at the time of COVID or individuals enrolled afterwards. A lot of people came down on the side of look at individuals enrolled or already in the program at the time of COVID as where they were going to spend their finances, not necessarily on new enrollments that come after the fact, because those individuals should know. The problem with that is, and I took the contrarian view very quickly, just not trying to monopolize the time here, but what if those individuals are looking at this and saying, hey, I'm willing to make the commitment, but I need your help because I don't want to stop and wait longer to try and continue or get into my education. So a long-winded way of saying there's a lot of things to discuss and consider here before you start allocating the resources, I believe.
I agree. And just a sidebar, just remember, we want to be sure that there's no way that those funds are offered to the students when they first go through admissions, because you don't want that to be an incentive thing to enroll students, which is going to get us into trouble, I think.
No, and again, above all else, this is the students' money. It goes to the students. It should in no way, shape, or form, in any form, come back to the institution.
Right.
A couple clarifications, just to make sure that I'm hearing properly and I concur with what's being said. Number one, if it's a non-Title IV program, I would not disperse this money to that program. That does not mean that if you have somebody who's in a Title IV program, that the cash paying student, that they would not be eligible. They would absolutely be eligible. So to clarify that. In terms of, you know, developing a system over time, the purpose of these money it ensures that the student can continue their education. So giving out all the money right away, and I'm not trying to make a joke, although it may sound funny, is maybe a sure incentive to get people to drop. You know, your students like, hey, I got $1,000. You know, I'm done.
Right.
So I think we have a responsibility to dole this money out to those students over time. And I know that a lot of people on this call would be very disappointed if they gave up all the money right away and numerous students dropped, and they could have used that money for students that were serious about getting a credential or degree. So while even the Paycheck Protection Plan, that money covers at least a 60-day window. Actually, if you read the regulation, they're using the February 15th date all the way to the June 30th date. So I think I agree with you, Sally, a year is too long, but a month is too short. And
yeah, I agree.
In between, the best method.
Yeah, I think, and just remember that the Secretary's letter on the grants and even the statute itself in Section 8004 makes it clear that there is one condition you can place on these funds and should place, and that is that the money should be used by students for qualifying need, which is basic, you know, expenses of attendance. So you can certainly require a student to demonstrate need, and whatever expedient way there is to do that they're going to use the money related to real need that they have right now: rent, food, technology costs, things like that. But any other condition, I think, that you would try to impose would be inappropriate.
And we should really get the student, I think, at least a letter explaining what the money can be used for, and have the student sign off that that's what they're going to use it for, if at all possible.
That was another thing that was talked about considerably on the NASTA call. And I only allude to that because, again, it's sharing of information from within our groups. There were a lot of them that talked about an application, not so much that they're not going to be giving the students the funds, but in an attempt to truly establish need and determine changes in need. There were several groups of schools that said that they have an application that basically just helps to inform the determination of award.
I don't personally like that process, because what if somebody doesn't fill it out and you never give them any money? I think
understood, Sally. Again, I'm not saying I'm not advocating for or against. I'm just trying to share. You know, as people are looking at this, there are a lot of different things that are being considered, and I just thought part of this was to share some of what those were.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to move on a little bit, because I'm sure we're going to get a million questions about this. We skipped one of the points, just so everybody's aware. You do not have to put, and you should not put, this on the student's ledger, and it does not go in estimated financial aid. It doesn't belong as part of the EFC, which I think in a few years, when they fill out the application for this current tax year, there's going to have to be something in that form to address this extra money that they got. I don't know where that's going to be, but that's something for the future. And then just quickly, Joe, is this going to affect 90-10 for the schools?
So in essence, this money is cost of living money, so it absolutely won't have an impact on 90-10.
Great.
This money, now the next tranche of money,
Right.
which we'll discuss on subsequent webinars, will have a 90-10 impact.
Okay. And just so everybody's aware, the deadline is 1 year from the letter, which I think was dated, I think the certificate says March 27th, but.
Before we leave that, I'm gonna pose a different point of view. I agree with Joe that the funds that are coming to the students should not be counted, but I'm going to throw a different justification for that. I believe that one of the reasons that the department ran this program through grants.gov and through the grant process is because that is a process separate and distinct from the awarding of financial aid. And if they award that as well as the institutional side through grants.gov and make this a grant program, not an SFA program, I believe that there is an interpretation and a statement that could be made and should be made that neither of these funds should be counted towards 90-10.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, Tom. And I have a question pending, and you may too, with senior officials on that issue. So we'll see how it comes out. Keep in mind that for the 90-10 calculation, money that goes into that is money that was paid to a school for institutional charges. So even the money that goes to the school, that the school can spend, the school side of this is not paid to it for institutional charges. It's paid as a grant to help it for all the transitional costs and loss of revenue that's COVID based. Really has nothing to do with institutional charges. So you can make a strong argument that it would be inappropriate to put it in there into 90-10. But I understand where you're coming from, Joe. You're saying you're getting the money from the federal government, so we ought to put it in there. And certainly our enemies, that is enemies of the for-profit sector, would want it in there, just like they want DOD money and GI Bill money in there too. But I think we should win the day on this.
So then next we're going to talk a little bit about the business office issues, and some of this we've already covered. So the first one is what's needed for accounting purposes. Since the money's received through the federal funds account, we've already said you need to move it. I think if you have your own chart of accounts and you don't use a third-party servicer, you're going to have to put something in your chart of accounts to account for this money coming in and then moving it back out, because it's coming through a federal funds account. And then how can the funds be tracked and reported to Ed? We've suggested some type of a spreadsheet, whatever, but you need to keep track of it, because eventually, as we said, we are going to have reports that have to go to the department. The first one's 30 days. And after that one, you have to report every 45 days until the money's all spent. So we don't know what that's going to look like, but just be sure that whatever you create, that you can move it to something else so that it can get reported to Ed correctly. We've already talked about the funds being moved to a separate account for dispersing to the students. And I just might want to add, be sure there's no bank charges on it. And if there are any bank charges, be sure you pay them. Again, every single penny of this money has to go to the student. So if you've already set up your other accounts and your bank charges go to your corporate account, that's ideal, because then there'll never be any charges in there that you have to worry about. And then can the school use the money to pay the school money due from the student if they have a balance in the payment period? Who wants to answer that one? I know the answer, but one of you need to answer it. So this money, it's supposed to go to the student, and the student owes you a whole bunch of money. Can you just take that money and apply it to the account?
Yeah, it's pretty clear that you can't do that because it doesn't cover tuition. Now, if the student gets that money and then they subsequently decide to make a payment to true up on their tuition if they're behind, that's at their discretion. But you cannot use the money and apply it to their account without giving them the money.
Yeah,
I would strongly suggest that you do not have a student sign a check back to you.
Yeah, this is a little like a school that's on heightened cash monitoring too, and it has to pay out credit balances, and then you want to get some of that credit balance money back from the student, and as you know, that's a real slippery situation, and the department routinely makes findings when that happens. They feel like the school is violating that prohibition against not holding on to the credit balance. So yeah, I agree with you, Sally. You're better off not doing that. You need to convey the funds clearly to the student, and the student needs to, if they want to use that money, they better turn around and write a check or do something to convey the money out of their account back to you.
Yeah,
and
I
make it
agree.
a clean second transaction if it happens.
So we're going to talk a little bit about R2T4 issues, and we could talk about this a long time. I've already had a couple of schools send me emails and saying the Department of Ed says we do have to make refunds, and that what you said on the webinar is incorrect. If you go back to the stimulus package, and what Congress has said is that the R2T4's money does not get returned. So you do have to do the calculation. The R2T4 money does not have to go back. Unfortunately, we don't know what to do with that. So again, I would suggest maybe you put the R2T4 money in a separate account like a holding account until they decide what they're going to do with that stuff. But my questions now are more like Joe, Ron, whoever feels comfortable answering.
Sure. As an auditor, I can kind of get some background on this. You still need to perform the calculation, number one.
Right.
Number two, you also need to do the institutional calculation as well. It says right now they may waive, but really what's happening is they're suspending the R2T4 returns until a later date. So we're telling people track those dollar amounts because at some point in time they may ask for that money. But they're saying to give you temporary cash flow relief, you do not need to make the R2T4 calc now. Now they may ultimately get waived. Any excess that goes to students is not waived. This is strictly money that would be returned to the government. So you're going to have to track that potential liability until more clarity on this issue comes out. So you need to make the calculation. You need to make the institutional calculation. You got to get the students their money, and you need to track it.
So, so you would post everything to the ledger card just like you were going to return it?
Absolutely.
And then what if when you get done with this, it creates a credit balance? Do you give that credit balance to the student, or do you hold it because it might have to go back?
If the credit balance is the result that the student would be eligible for, you got to send them that money. It'll go to the student.
Well, no, they wouldn't have been eligible for it before, but now when you do your return to Title IV and that student account is all paid up, and yet you've still got money that you didn't return because you weren't required to return it at this point, that now would create a credit balance in some cases. So that money, should we keep in a fund and hold it, or return it to the student like a credit balance?
And that, like one instance where that probably is going to become more prevalent is on a post withdrawal disbursement on a loan per se. And it's my understanding that you're probably going to have to send that money back to the student. And then they'll be responsible for that.
Well, hopefully that's a question somebody will answer later on for us, because I get questions like that every day and I sure as heck don't know how to answer them. All right, let's look at the next ones.
Sally, one
yeah.
other thing, I think schools that are on the call here need to be reminded that there are a lot of reasons, of course, why students withdraw, and they need to carefully document the situation where they believe a student has withdrawn because of COVID. Put that in the student's file as a reason why they're not returning that R2T4 money. So distinguish it, make sure you can, establish in writing that it was a COVID-caused withdrawal. We talked a little bit about this among ourselves. You could have a student who says, I'm withdrawing because I'm not comfortable taking this program online. I signed up to take it when it was being offered on ground. I've never done online education. I don't want to do it. So is that a COVID-based withdrawal? I think you could treat it that way because the student doesn't want to do it online, and that's a reason to not do it if they're not comfortable, and it really is stemming from COVID. But again, you should document it, put it in the file, do the R2T4 calculation, as Joe said, put that there as well, and then hold the money aside. So make sure you document carefully in these situations.
And one of the things I wanted to add, and I forgot when we were talking about the grant money coming down, FAME is a third-party servicer. Once you notify us that you've done a certification, we are monitoring to see when that cash comes in. We will automatically draw that cash down so that you're aware that you have it. We're not going to commingle funds. It'll just strictly be the grant money that you have coming in. And of course, there's never a charge for something like that. That's just part of our normal processes. So, don't worry about how you're getting that money. We're going to be sure that you get it if you're a processing client. We're going to talk just shortly about the payroll protection plan. I've had a lot of schools that didn't know whether to apply, didn't know how to apply, didn't know whether it was worthwhile. So I think, Joe, do you want to start off a little bit and tell us a little bit about the payroll protection plan and why people should do it?
Sure, I'll go quick and furious here. So you absolutely should apply. I don't know anybody, it's maybe an online school, but everybody's been affected. So everybody who has under 500 employees has been affected by COVID-19. And the payroll protection plan is something you absolutely should apply for. It starts out as a loan, but can be forgiven if you use it for the intended purposes, which is payroll, rent, and utilities, and they go into what those expenses are. And the beauty of this program is it's an infusion of capital into your balance sheet, and you will still get a tax deduction for the money that you receive. So basically, whatever you receive will not be income. It'll be as though you put it in yourself. So this process is now starting to get traction. People are actually getting approval. The money is going out. So there's people on the call that are thinking, yeah, like I wonder how this is going. No, it's going. Money is actually being transferred from the bank into corporate account. This is not exclusive for schools. All small businesses are eligible. Millions of companies are applying for this. So if you haven't started, and after this webinar, I will get on the phone with your banker, with your accountant, with your financial advisor, and say, should I be doing this, and how quickly do I have to get this done? All the money will not be dispersed, unfortunately, before 5/1. Originally, I thought they thought it would, and that's why they used the end date of 6/30. That's probably going to get pushed back, but it's through the local banks. It will. It's being successful right now. I haven't heard anybody not have success. Now there are people who are waiting for approval, but I've had nobody, and we work with hundreds of schools on this. None of them have gotten a response back from the bank that, you're not eligible because you're a school or you weren't financially affected by COVID-19. There's no personal guarantees on this money. Because ultimately, if you do not use this money for the intended purposes, then you will not get it forgiven, and it will convert into an SBA loan with very favorable terms. So even if you didn't think you were going to use this money in its entirety for what would be forgiven, the remainder you can either A, give back, or B, it will be converted into a very favorable loan with no personal guarantee. So we're advising everybody to apply for the payroll protection plan.
That's awesome, Joe. Thank you so much. And I don't know anything about the bankruptcy protections that are included. Do you know anything about that? Or does anybody, Ron?
Well, as a practical matter, school, doesn't want to file bankruptcy because under the HEA, if you do, you lose forever your eligibility for Title IV funds. But I don't think that these loans are any different than any other loan when it comes to filing bankruptcy. If you filed it, I think that you would qualify for a discharge, but unfortunately, you would also lose your eligibility for Title IV funds, not only now, but forever. So it wouldn't be a path you'd want to travel. But as Joe said, it's a very favorable loan if, in fact, you don't use all of the funds for the forgivable uses, which are 75% for payroll, 25% for rent, utilities, and interest on a qualifying prior loan. And so if you don't use it in that manner completely and some portion of the loan isn't forgiven, then you have 2 years to pay it back at, I believe, 1% interest rate. So it's still not a bad deal at all. And the amount you can borrow is 2.5 times your average payroll over the last 12 months. You do have to use the funds within an 8-week period from disbursement. So you need to get in there and apply right away. There was $357 billion allocated by the Congress in the CARES Act. And listening to the news this morning, over $250 billion has been dispersed already. Wow. There's a proposal in front of the Congress to appropriate another $250 billion. There's been squabbling over the legislation between the Democrats and the Republicans as to whether other items should be added to the bill that would add the $250 billion. Maybe Tom has an update on where that stands.
So
The earliest that they can have any conversations about that is tomorrow when the Senate comes back into pro forma session. But because of the discord on a number of the specifics, not the least of which is related to sick leave pay and a couple of other issues, it will not be this week. The belief is that if they're going to do this, it might not happen until they come back into town sometime at the latter half of this month, or now potentially in the early part of May. So while the $359 billion is out there, and again, a considerable amount of it has already been expended, that's the money that we have right now. I think that people have gotten over the initial fears, and when I say that, including the banks, a number of the banks were slow rolling and adding application requirements, as I understand it from our community, over and above what the actual CARES Act PPP program required, for good reason. They need to protect themselves as well. And as part of that, it slowed some of the process. But I think that schools are continuing to look at it. I would remind everybody once again that of that 75% that must be payroll, if you do not have, the whole goal here was to sustain business as usual. If you do not have the same number of employees at the point at which the 8-week period is done, you will have some portion of those funds that will be reducted or reduced and be in the form of a loan.
Great,
Good
guys.
point.
So
Good
much.
point. One quick thing, and I'll wrap this part up, Sally. First of all, no pork chops. I'm sorry, for dinner. That was a joke.
Right.
But yeah, you got to have the same head count or it gets reduced. The head count was supposed to be as of June 30th. However, if you don't get the money until after May 1st, then obviously I think that they will get extended. That'll be on subsequent FAME presentations. We clarify that. And the other thing I wanted to say was that since most of the money is already committed to, that there are a lot of banks right now that are already not taking new applications. So for those of you on this call that have been wavering, and now as a result of listening to what's been said, say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do that, get with your banker today or with your bank and verify that they're taking application, would be my recommendation.
Okay, thanks, guys. That was really good. So we're moving on to some other issues. The stimulus bill indicates institutions don't have to make refunds. I mean, that's what it says, but they do have to do the calculations. Any idea if this is going to impact 90/10? If they don't make those refunds and they never have to make them?
Yeah, that's absolutely going to have a negative impact. I mean, if you're at 88, 89%, and all of a sudden you don't make a refund, now the question becomes, and this will be developed over the next couple of weeks and webinars to continue on, is the three big things are going to be composite score, right? 90/10. Can I get my audit done on time? I mean, I'm being a little selfish here, but those are the three things that we're honing in on. And I'll tell you right now that, I suspect that there's going to be some 90/10 relief. Clearly, the president has identified all 50 states is eligible for, I don't know what the terminology is, but he's deemed them all as disaster zones or
national emergency.
Yeah, so everybody on their audit, every single audit that we do will have an extraordinary event on it. I don't think the department's going to like that, because the extraordinary event gives you some relief from composite scores. It gives you relief from 90/10. It gives you relief from potentially if you have to submit a late audit. We don't want to do that anyway, although I suspect they will suspend the deadline because they've already done it with the IRS for every single deadline they've had up to this point in time.
Great, that's good information, Joe. Thank you. So Tom, I think it says in the stimulus bill that the department could give waivers for not returning the funds. Do you think we're going to actually have to get a waiver, or is it going to be something that would be an automatic thing? Do you know?
Well, again, the waivers right now that are in the statute, and I actually have that up in front of me because of the previous discussion. The waivers talk specifically to not only the reporting requirements, but the student waivers. I don't think that we are going to have to do anything in particular other than the reporting that we've already talked about. And going back to that very briefly, the statute says very clearly that from the waiver perspective, an institution using a waiver under these requirements should report the number of such recipients, the amount of the grants and the loan assistance, and the total amount associated with each such individual as part of the report. I think that that's the information that they're going to be looking for. I don't think you need a waiver for that. The waiver from a student perspective is that those funds are going to be protected. They're not going to have to be given back. The rollout of that is, yes, those then become Title IV funds that are dispersed. I agree with Joe that there's no way to not count them currently under the 90/10 because they're still funds that have flown through and out to the student. There is also a ripple effect to that that's additional funds that individual has that in the unfortunate event that they do not repay their loans, that's more money towards their loans and towards the accrual of interest down the road as well. So, there are ripple effects that will go far beyond the near term as we look at this over a continued period of time. But in terms of, Sally, to your question of, do we have to have a waiver of not returning the funds? The answer is no.
Thank you. Ron, I think I want you to at least start off addressing this one, temporary distance education, and especially for the clock hour schools that are now scrambling to put this into place, had no idea how to do it. They do have some platforms, especially the cosmetology schools, have some platforms like Pivot Point and Mind something. I can't remember the other word. Anyway, they have some platforms out there. Some of it tracks pretty well. I understand some of it doesn't track real well on the student's phone, and that's what they're using. So how much instructor interaction do they have to have? I mean, a couple of times during the day, depending on the hours, or what do you think?
Well, there's varying guidance from the department on this. They started out with that March 5th guidance about going online, and as long as you had approval from your accrediting body to do it, and if you were in a state where your clock hours were required for licensure and you also had approval from the licensing body, you could go ahead and do it. And then on March 20, they issued the Q&A. And I just looked at that again this morning, and that Q&A uses some sort of troubling language, which I don't think got relaxed in the April 3 guidance from the department. It says that if you offer a clock hour program in a distance ed format, you have to ensure that each clock hour is supervised by qualified institutional personnel. Well, that would suggest that you have to do everything in a synchronous format. And that means you all have to be together on a Zoom call or Microsoft Teams or something like that, FaceTime or some other vehicle that allows you to be together to actually see the person, know that they're participating. And this Q&A goes on to talk about offering some other kind of format, and then it does say, well, you could have asynchronous instruction in a clock hour format, but then you have to use an online learning platform, which of course is how it's done by existing online programs that are offered through an asynchronous modality. They do a platform that allows them to maintain an electronic footprint, so to speak, to show the interaction of student and instructor, to show that they are in fact having regular and substantive interaction. So for schools that haven't been able to quickly grab a hold of some kind of platform, the alternative seems to be synchronous education of some kind. I don't know that just having the student keep a logbook saying, yeah, I was reading for an hour, reading my textbook, or I was logged on and I was downloading materials and reading those materials online would be adequate. But I think you and I separately discussed this at one point, Sally, and I told you I think that the guidance so far from the department is certainly incomplete and confusing. And I think if a school made a good faith effort and did outline for its students a reasonable system of keeping time, keeping a record, and if they required their students, for example, to turn in a weekly or a daily would be better, but a weekly, at least a weekly log, an inventory of what they did that week with hours on a daily basis, showing the time that was spent on various assignments that were handed out, as well as on synchronous class sessions. That would go a long ways toward demonstrating what kind of time was put in by the student and the school. And I think later on, if the department were to conduct some sort of an audit or program review and disallow hours, and then the school were to challenge that if it became necessary in some kind of an appeal, school would have a good chance of prevailing given the extraordinary circumstances they were operating under. So from my point of view, I think, you know, the most safe approach to this would of course be, you know, using an LMS, a learning management system, and an online platform. But if that doesn't exist, the second most safe approach for clock hour school online is the synchronous approach to everything, where the instructor is present with the students. And if you can't do it that way, then the next best thing is requiring students to follow some recording system that is very frequent, where they turn their hours into you at the school and you keep track of them. It's a rational system, and it's regular, and it requires regular interaction. So it's not just the student reading at home. You have to have some mix of synchronous sessions in there to ensure that there is some degree of regular interaction along with the student reading materials on their own time. That's
I think, I'm sorry, I think most of the schools are doing some type of synchronous part of the day, and then a combination of the other, like they assign a lecture time. That lecture time, they've assigned how long it should take the student to complete that, and the test or whatever that goes with it. And then it's graded, and so that there is some interaction going back and forth. But and I think they're getting better at it now that they've been doing it a few weeks, at figuring out how to, you know, everybody was kind of on a learning curve at the beginning, but I think now they're getting pretty good at the systems they're using. The next one has to do with SAT progress. I have a lot of schools that don't know, can they write a policy on what they're doing during this period for students that drop out or the school closed without completing a payment period. I know credit hour is easy, because credit hour, you know, they're saying that they'll be able to look at the quantitative and just say that that is something that, you know, they're going to disallow. But we have schools that I know didn't complete a term and they're requesting a change in their academic year. Did those schools just kind of use the last grades they have? What do they consider?
Hey, Sally, in this area, so a clock hour school, if you can continue the issue before was, can they continue their education at the same point they were before they went on an LOA or whatever? And if it's within the payment period, then it's okay. Once they go past the payment period, if they're not going to be able to finish that payment period, then they will be a drop, and then they'll have to re-enter in the next payment period. That's how I'm understanding it.
Yeah, you're talking.
The statute says specifically that you don't have to re-enter at the same spot.
Correct. You can re-enter where you left off as long as it's within the payment period.
Right, so it doesn't matter, it doesn't
School.
point.
Sorry.
Yeah, so you're talking about the LOAs.
Yeah, I guess I'm commingling SAP with LOA. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so the SAP, Ron, you have any suggestions on what they're going to do with those students? We sure don't have much guidance on it. I guess that's something, Tom, they're working on?
Yes, they specifically said in the previous guidance that SAP was another, like with R2T4 and the others. I think that, again, the wording matters, and the wording under satisfactory academic progress specifically talks to the fact that what the institution can do is to exclude from the quantitative component of the calculation any attempted credits that were not completed. To me, that reads as if what they are looking to do here is if a student were to drop as a result of COVID, national emergency related issues, this does not negatively affect, that last semester does not negatively affect their overall grading and reporting.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And that's all that it does. It basically,
Right.
again, all of these provisions for the student's benefit were written in order to keep the student as whole as possible.
So with that, they would just have to write a policy and procedure for the school for the COVID payment periods affected, so that they have something 2 years down the road in writing on what they did and why that student's grades weren't included.
Correct, and this could be as simple as a ledger notation yet again, Sally, again. I think a number of schools are going to address it a number of different ways, just as long as it's to the benefit of the student. That's what the intent here is.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Ron, did you want to say something?
Well, I didn't know if your question was posing a scenario in which the student was in a failing situation. They had a grade in terms of an academic grade, a qualitative grade that was below the school's minimum level. And, having dropped out under those circumstances normally wouldn't qualify to re-enter. That would be separate and apart from COVID, and their academic performance presumably wasn't the result of COVID. If that was the situation, then I don't know that they would be treated any differently because of COVID.
I didn't mention, though, that if that was the situation, that they didn't have to appeal if there's a problem because of COVID?
It does say that they
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, if they dropped out, because of COVID or during the COVID crisis, yeah. And you could, this is where you're kind of drawing hairs on causation. I mean, a student maybe does perform poorly if their grades started to go downhill during the COVID crisis because of stress and everything else that's going on. So it's kind of hard to draw the line on that, where it's coming from.
The last slide is more things that I think we don't know any answers to, except for toward the bottom. So how will COD know which drops are a result of COVID-19? I'm assuming they're going to have to give us some types of codes to use. Anybody have any ideas? I have none. And should we currently update NSLDS with drop status or wait until we have a way to indicate COVID-19 as a reason? I know they said that you didn't necessarily have to change NSLDS with a current status until things were somewhat back to normal. I don't know if we're looking to again, for the department to know how this is going to affect lifetime limits and SULAs and loan payments that don't have to be made for a current payment period if the student withdrew. There has to be some way for us to report this, and right now there's no way out there.
Yeah, Tom, in your discussions with the people at the department that you've had, have they given any indication on the timing of this report that's mentioned in section 3508 on waivers for students that withdraw due to COVID, where you're supposed to report the number of recipients, the amount of the R2T4 that's not being returned? Like when they
No, but again, my assumption, and this, I will put a great big asterisk that this is my assumption, is because that this is part of where you now have a complete year to put forth the funds. You know, the R2T4, they haven't put any time parameters around it yet that I'm aware of, other than the qualifying emergency, Ron. So, you know, I think that at minimum, it goes and relates to the various dates that we have for the qualifying emergency and the period of time that, because I would hope, and I would think you might argue this with me, if we're giving away these additional funds to a student, don't we want those protected under this R2T4 calculation as well?
Sure. Sure.
So wouldn't that pretend that those funds would have to, if you've got a year to disperse them, wouldn't you have to have a year to be able to show that those aren't included under R2T4?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or, you know, again, and that all depends on how they're considering them. If they don't consider them Title IV funds and grant funds, are they, as you know, speaking with forked tongue, does that mean that they're protected, they're in a protected class already, and we're only looking at the Title IV stuff as it relates to truly FSA funds under Title IV? And then, you know, long way of saying I don't have an answer for you, but I think that because they're considering a lot of different things.
Right. So the last couple ones, we already know answers to. If they can't complete fiscal reporting due to COVID, what do? They obviously have to notify Department of Education that they're unable to complete their fiscal reporting because they're closed and they can't go into school, or they don't have access to their information. Some of these schools are not very sophisticated. We have several schools out there that have just closed and are not trying to do anything, not trying to do any distance ed, just waiting until they can go back. And the same about timely enrollment reporting. I don't know. I'm assuming if enrollment reporting goes out and the schools can't complete it, they're not going to get dinged for it being late because they don't have access to the information. Anybody disagree with me?
We're going to be auditing that, and we would definitely put COVID-19 related on our work paper and not have it as a finding.
Great, Joe. Thank you. All right, so I think we're going to, anybody have anything else before we open it up to questions? I'm sure we have a bunch. So this is just information for FAME, how to contact us. You can contact any of the speakers through their information, and we want to thank you for being part of us today. Joe, do we have questions?
Oh, yes, we do, Sally. Where do I begin? So it looks like because I have so many questions, I'm going to try and jump around just to be fair. So this way I can get a little bit of everybody if possible. The first question.
Before you start, just so everybody's aware, we will post this on our website and on our help, both places. And in addition to that, we also are trying to gather all the questions and answers. So if we don't get to them all today, we will get to them.
Thank you for that, Sally. How do we code in NSLDS a student who withdrew due to COVID-19?
No idea. Hey, I'm brutally honest.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Are these funds only to be used for Title IV students?
They can be used for cash pays as well, as long as they're in a Title IV eligible program.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. And how do you disperse grant funds? Should these be checks mailed to the students, or what does the panel recommend?
I think any way that goes directly to the student and it doesn't cost the student anything. I think we had some discussions yesterday about whether people could use things like Bimbo or any of those other apps that go straight into the student's account.
Okay. And then what parameters should we use to pick the students to receive the grants? For example, if we have students that are graduating prior to us dispersing the money, should we also award them?
I would say yes, they're currently in school and currently had need. Anybody disagree?
I wouldn't disagree. We kind of talked earlier about whether you should use it for people that were almost graduating or students that were starting. If you had a class start next week, and when you enroll these students, they thought they were going to be coming into your school, and then as a result of them having to go to distance learning, they've had to, get technology at home or whatever, so those students would be eligible. So there's a lot of discretion here, and I would create a plan that you're comfortable with that could be prior students or future students within the COVID-19 period.
Okay. And I'm going to give you another question to follow off of that one. So just to clarify, this money is for continuing students, not for new incoming students. Is that correct?
It's an open-ended question. We don't know yet.
Perfect. Can we exclude students who are on leave of absence from receiving these emergency fund money?
I don't think so, but I don't know how anybody else feels.
If you made that part of your policy, I guess you could. I don't necessarily know why you would, because an LOA is an individual who in theory is committing to come back. And if you're trying to support and do things in order to help ensure that they come back to the best of your ability, wouldn't those funds be something that may or may not be a tipping point?
I think also some of those students take an LOA because they have to go to work and are having financial difficulties such as childcare, etc. So they probably need the money just as much as anybody else.
Yeah, that's
Clearly, if we weren't in these times, anybody on LOA, you would not be eligible for a disbursement during your LOA period. So
correct.
it would be, I mean, just to cut to the chase here, like, we want to take care of people, but if they have no intention of coming back, I as the school owners, surely would not want to be giving them money when the intent of this money is to continue their education. So you'd want to get them clarity. If you have a policy like that, even though you're on LOA, when you arrive back from your LOA, you'd be eligible, that would be the way to do it, right? That may encourage someone to make sure they come back from their LOA. We already have support. We're not discriminating against people who are on LOAs when we already can't disperse Title IV funds to people who are on LOA. So that would be my approach.
I think it depends on the situation. You have a lot of schools have students on LOAs because they can't do their clinicals, can't do their internships, but not because they didn't want to come to school.
Sure.
And Sally, you just took the words. That's where I was going to go. Some of these LOAs right now, Joel, are for that very reason, not because the individual has chosen to. It's because until circumstances can be alleviated to bring them back into an actual program, the institution and the student are agreeing to be on an LOA pending the ability to put them back in the right environment.
Or the schools even closed and put all of their students on an LOA.
This is just another reason why not to get the money out all right away. So if all of a sudden you get some money out, and then, I mean, I think we're all hopeful on this call that life will resume at some point. School students will physically be able to go back to the school. They'll be able to go on internship. So if that's the reason, that's a COVID-related reason why they can't physically go somewhere, you can devise a policy that would definitely cover those students, and potentially somebody who's been on an LOA for 4 months before the COVID period started. The COVID period didn't affect their ability to, that had nothing to do with their LOA at this point. So would that be somebody that would not be able to participate based on a policy? Absolutely. Whereas somebody whose LOA was COVID related would be able to get some of this money. I'm just saying there are ways to make sure students who are serious about their education get the money first.
Yeah, well, that just comes back to prioritizing need if you have the time to do it.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Tom. Our next question, will Title IV students who are currently attending an online institution be included in this payout, not just brick and mortar?
Absolutely.
Okay, and our next question, can you confirm that schools are required to complete the R2T4 calculation and post any refunds back to Ed on the student's ledger as if the refund was completed, but just keep the funds in their school account instead of actually sending it back?
That's confirmed.
Okay,
That's exactly the way I would do it.
and they need to track the amount of those funds that they did not send back.
Yeah,
I would even suggest they keep them in a separate account to make sure that they have the money there to send back, if that has to go back, or if they decide at some point that it's going to be used for other students.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. So it says, hi, did I hear someone mention these funds are only for students enrolled in Title IV eligible programs, or as long as it's a Title IV eligible school, even a non-Title IV program such as a 300-hour program, would a student in that 300-hour program also be eligible for these funds?
I would say no.
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody disagree with that? We're all under the same impression that it should only go to Title IV eligible programs at this point.
We are, but stay tuned. Again,
Right.
in lieu of guidance, I think that is certainly the opinion shared by literally everybody I've spoken with. But until we see it in writing, it is open.
We'll submit the question to COVID-19.
Don't bother, Sally. I already have.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's another reason we keep getting all these caveats, and we need a little bit more clarity. If somebody's not getting Title IV funds, they use the formula that was based on Title IV. They want to make sure that the education is provided. We have accrediting bodies, we have state legislation. I have a feeling that there's no way that money is going to be eligible. And I would love to be wrong. I love every student to have an opportunity, but that's just more the reason to give out some of the money now, and then later on, if all of a sudden there's a clarity in 2 weeks after you did your initial disbursement that the non-eligible Title IV program that's within the Title IV institution guidelines, those students are eligible, you'll have resources to take care of those students as well. But at this point in time, I would, if someone put it, I would say not to disperse money to those students.
Okay, it looks like our next question, if for some reason the PPP loan has to be paid back, will that be calculated in our composite score or our asset to liability ratio?
If the PPP won't have to be paid back, it will have minimal to no impact because the money's coming in as a capital contribution. I said minimal to none because it has a maybe 0.1 or less impact on the balance sheet potentially, depending on the size of the dollar amount. So it has almost no effect. So if you convert it to a loan, it may have, if anything, it's almost no effect. But you're getting a tax deduction from a cash flow / practical standpoint, you want to use all the money if you can.
Thank you, Joe.
Saving you from going into debt too. So like from borrowing a conventional loan and putting debt on your balance sheet, it's sparing you from that.
Correct.
So Joe, your interpretation is this money would not be considered, and I'm sorry for the phone, would not be considered money that would go on your books as long-term debt?
Well, it will, but then hopefully if you abide by we're talking about the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Plan. It goes on as a loan, and then hopefully in a very short period, because we're talking about 60 days, right, Tom? Hopefully you've abided by the standard before the end of the year and well before your reporting requirement, if you're calendar year end, you're going to know, hopefully this will be off your income statement. and your balance, yeah, I'm sorry, your balance sheet, it'll be off your balance sheet. So in the event you convert it to a loan, that could conceivably have a slight adverse effect. I'm thinking that I don't think anybody who's listening to this webinar intention is to, I'll apply for the PPP, but I won't spend any of the money on payroll. Well, then you should have just done a emergency impact disaster loan. I mean, the intent is, even if I get almost to 90% of my payroll and I got to give back 10% of the money, at that point in time, if I can convert it to a loan, I can sit down with my accountant and see what the impact is. I'm telling you right now, that should not be a deterrent to applying for the program, and it will have a very nominal effect. There are some debt, new debt is not being counted against long-term debt conceivably for this. So it could have a slight negative impact, but it's going to be very nominal. It shouldn't be a deterrent to applying for the program.
Are the tracking mechanisms in place in order to be able to ensure that in the audited side that can be actually accounted for? I asked that question because several people have asked me, and I'm not an accountant.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, right? Because I mean, it's going to be payroll related. So you're just going to grab payroll, and you're going to take whatever your payroll was. You're going to have your cost allocation in the 60 days. Obviously, they're giving you some discretion to use some of those monies. You can use 100% of the money for payroll. You don't have to worry about your rent,
correct,
your utility. But they're giving you the ability to use the rent utility to cover the gap if you can't get all the way up. In other words, you keep your head count the same, but in order to survive, everybody took a little bit of a haircut. So your dollars are down 25%. They're allowing you to use rent and other expenses to cover that period. All that to say, if you get almost all the way there, they're going to prorate the amount that's eligible. And there will be, I'm assuming, to my chagrin, that that banks will probably want outside third parties to do some kind of an attestation. They may do it internally, but I mean, I'd be shocked if they're actually going to take that level of risk. They're going to want a third party attestation probably. Hopefully not, because you know they are getting an orientation fee for this. But we'd be naive to think that they're not going to make you do some form of accounting from a third party. And that will be done though well before year end for calendar year people. So you'll easily have at least a quarter to see what the impact is going to be on your composite score. Sorry.
Okay, I'll give you the next question. Who can we contact for help with grants.gov, specifically setting up workspace? I've been stuck since yesterday.
Donald Trump.
It is the bane. You are not alone. It is the bane of countless people within our community, and I might add, with other communities within the higher education communities, frustration right now. NASFA was on the previous call that I was just on with their webinar. Within our community, there are a number of people that are very much like you that are trying to make their way through it, think that they've gotten all the way to the point where they could submit, but still have the gray button as opposed to the red button because they don't have the jurisdiction to be able to do it. A number of people having problems with setting up Workplace and then being able to use Workplace to get through the filing system. Stick with it. That's what everybody says is if you call the help desk and if you call the other places, it does take time. It is frustrating, but a number of people, even with those frustrations, have been able to go through and hit submit. I say that only to say I have yet to hear of anybody that has had theirs approved yet. So again, stay tuned as to even whether those that think they have been successful have in fact been so.
Hey, Tom, I have good news on that front. We have clients that have gotten the approval letter. So I'm going to put a challenge out to everybody on this call. All right, we're a community together. You know, Tom, you run an organization that supports all the schools. Fame has done a tremendous job of training. Ron, I know you're on the phone all the time. And basically, I just steal everybody else's idea and try to contribute. We've had a lot of clients reach out to us. They've gotten through it, and they said, if you have anybody who wants help. So my challenge to everybody on this call is, as a community, if you've already done it, go on if you're a cosmetology school, go on the ACWeb, the listserv, let Fame know, let someone like me know, but help each other out, because first of all, approvals are already being had. And when you're going to the screen, if you've already done it, you know where the challenges are. The challenges are with the eBiz, PO. I know the people on the call are gonna be like, what the heck is Joe talking about? But there's certain parts where you run into your problem. Like, you need to know your congressional code, and they're having problems with the DUNS numbers. And yes, you can contact the SBA or the grant.gov representative who have been helpful. But I'm challenging everybody on the phone who's already gone through this process to lend support to your fellow school owners and just jump on the phone, because I just did this with another client and it would have taken an hour. The two people, the person who had already successfully navigated the process was able to help the person do it in 10 minutes. And I'm willing to do that for people who are really struggling. Just send an email, but reach out to other school owners and say, hey, have you got this done? I'm having a challenge in this area. My DUNS number is an issue. The SAM's registration is an issue. I don't know my congressional code. And I don't have all those memorized yet. Tom does. So if you need to get a congressional code, he's got them all committed to memory, right, Tom?
Most of them.
And just remember, those of us on the phone that want to help you, we can't get into that. We can't go in and register. So,
yeah.
So we can't help you through that portion because we can't get in there ourselves to do it, see what it looks like. It's not that we don't want to help.
Thank you for that, Sally, Joe, Ron, and Tom. Our next question actually was just piggybacking off of Joe's comment. What do we do if our DUNS number isn't working on the grant's website?
Make sure it's correct, number one. I've had a few schools call me and say, oh, I just realized our DUNS number that we use on our e-app and on our e-car is not the same as what it is there. So you need to be sure that, your DUNS number is correct. And you can go through SAM's and find out what it is, and all the information is there. It takes a little while, but they do answer the phone eventually.
And the 5-second answer is you're going to have to go on Dun & Bradstreet and verify it.
And you can go to Duns & Bradstreet, you said, and verify?
You can go on the DNB website or get a representative to help you with that.
Okay. Okay. Is there any change in the maximum length of an LOA?
No.
180
days in a 12-month period. So if those students have exceeded that or are going to exceed it because you're closed or whatever, you're going to have to drop them.
Yeah, if COVID lasts longer than that, we're going to have bigger problems than LOA.
Well, no, there are students already out there on leaves, though, that have been on leaves for a while, and now they have the additional problem that, the school's closed or whatever.
Okay. Any suggestion on how far back we should go for graduated students in dispersing emergency funds?
I'm not sure you need to go back. They're no longer in school.
Yeah. Well, to U215 and the PPP, the U215 is the deadline. If you go back into last year, I don't know how you would be able to justify they were affected by COVID-19. Anything before February 15th. I'm only using that date because that was a date thrown out for the payroll protection program.
Okay.
But again, I think if your students graduated already, hopefully they weren't affected that much by it while they were still in school, because this is to help them with the cost of attendance while they're in school.
Okay.
So it's just my personal opinion. I don't know how anybody else feels. But if somebody graduated like March 15th or March 20th or April 1st, I'm not sure. I feel you could easily justify it to students that are in school.
Okay. Well, right now it looks like Again, we still have so many questions coming through. I have one question coming in. What is a congressional code?
We're talking about the Congressional District Code and grant.gov.
Yes.
Like, I don't think any of us have, we can't get on there, but they're well, like I had a good friend of mine call me from I don't know if she's on the call, but I'll embarrass her, but from the state of Montana, and they only have one congressional code there. So it's like at large. And at 6:30 in the morning, I didn't know what that code was off the top of my head. I'm slacking. But I'm sure you can Google your congressional code and get that number.
One of the easiest ways to do that is go to congress.gov, and on the right-hand side, there's a section on how to find your members of Congress, or you can literally type in who is my member of Congress, and you'll get a number of different web vehicles where you can type in your address and your zip code, and it will kick out that and generate that information for you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I just want to say, Sally, Tom, Ron, Joe, thank you for, again, another amazing webinar. You've given us just so much information. Any last thoughts before I let you guys go today?
God bless everybody on this call.
Everybody stay well and healthy, and hopefully we'll have some kind of normalcy not too far in the future. But we will see you again next week.
And hang in there. There will be more information to follow, and I think some of the guidance on some of these many areas will be forthcoming and will be, again, favorable to students, but also supportive within the department's capabilities to the concerns that you all have addressed or expressed from an institutional perspective.
And Joe, thank you for your assistance today.
Thank you, Sally. And you guys just stay safe and be well. And hopefully we'll see each other real soon.
Here,
Bye
here.
now.
Bye-bye.